It's on! We're chopping!
Hi, I'm Joe, and welcome to MotorCity Boat Works. Let's get to work. If you're new to the channel, I want to welcome you, and if you're one of our returning subscribers, welcome back to the Werks. This episode is part 2 of how I installed the steps in the forward cabin of my Albin 27 pocket trawler. The boat behind me is completely empty. I'm reassembling it and rebuilding it to my own specifications for some long-term cruising that I'll be enjoying in my retirement. Last episode, I talked about what prompted me to get started on the forward cabin steps. I had an accident and fell into the forward cabin, injuring my back and my side. Luckily, everything worked out okay, but it was back to work. So in the V-berth, I have to fabricate something to make up the distance between the head bulkhead and where the stairs would normally be mounted. And I've created a small box that will be screwed and then fiberglassed in place against the Coosa Board bulkhead. It's already finished out. If you've been watching my channel, you already know that one of the things that makes my boat unique is that I've gone ahead and modified the bathroom or the head area of the Albin 27 to be quite a bit larger. I've covered this in a 2-part episode where I talk about modifying the head on my boat. And you should really watch it to kind of understand why certain parts of the bulkheads are not in place for the installation of the forward cabin steps. Now you're probably asking yourself, why doesn't he just make longer, wider steps that'll cover that gap, and then he doesn't have to fabricate anything? And this brings up a great point, which is boat restoration rule number 6. Whenever possible, you want to reuse the original parts and materials from the original boat that you're actually working on. Oftentimes, these items, these materials, this equipment is better quality than what you can get on the market today. If you reuse it, you don't have to fabricate anything new. In this case, I have the original steps from the forward cabin. They're 1-inch thick pieces of teak. They're finished beautifully and they're in great shape. It just doesn't make sense to have to start all over again trying to build new steps that are even wider. We don't want the steps to be too wide. The bigger the span, the more likelihood that at some point the steps might break. The box itself is assembled using the screw and glue method, and the edges are sanded down and routed with a 1/4 router bit to give it a nice round over look. The nice thing about Coosa Board is that you can use a palm sander and kind of sculpt it to get the look that you want. Now, I've talked about this in previous episodes where I described composite materials that I use for various boat building projects. If you're new to the channel and you're not familiar with these materials, do me a favor, take a moment to watch my playlist. It's called Coosa Board and Composite Boat Building Materials. In that playlist, I cover many of the projects that I've built on the boat, and I talk about which materials you use for which purpose, some of my techniques, where you can source the materials effectively, and really how they should be used. Check it out. I generally use 2 types of material when I've been working on this boat. One of them is PVC foam board. It's a type of PVC plastic. It's very lightweight, it's waterproof, it has an extremely smooth surface, and it takes paint really well. The other material that I use is this Coosa Board. It's a marine plywood substitute. It's a rigid polyurethane foam that is impregnated with fiberglass fibers. And it's great for doing structural type of construction where you really need to have something that's very strong, but also lightweight and waterproof. MotorCity Boat Works has no sponsors, and I get no compensation from any of the companies or the products that I sometimes mention on my channel. However, in the description, I sometimes put links for Amazon where you can find some of the tools or items that I'm using in the restoration of my boat. Amazon does provide a small commission if you use those links. This is what it looks like. So we've built this Coosa Board box, 3-sided box. And it's going to go right inside here like this. We're going to use a 1/2 inch round over bit, I'm sorry, 1/4 inch round over bit on a 1/2 inch material, and we're going to turn this down. It'll have a nice finish similar to what's over here already. And we're going to mount this to this permanently by using a series of cheater blocks so that we have something to screw this into, but that's not what's mounting it. What's actually mounting it is going to be the epoxy that essentially glues it in place to this bulkhead. Now, we may leave the screws in place and cover them up because there'll be no roundovers on the sides if we space them out far enough, but that's what will make this 100% rigid. And then we should be able to mount the step block right here that the first step is going to sit on. And we'll be able to put a hatch inside here, so this will be a storage space. In this way, we've got a mount for the steps, but we're not taking up any of the bulkhead shoulder space here. So I still have plenty of space inside here, because the last thing I want to do is bring this bulkhead in, crushing my shoulders, right? So, and we can also put shelves here, maybe hang something. I don't know, we'll find something interesting to put there. Don't worry. All right, so now we've got everything kind of roughly in place, and the next thing we need to do is make sure that the stairs are parallel to each other, because just sitting here looking at it, you might think, oh, one side is higher than the other, but remember, all that has to do with whether the boat is actually level to the ground in the stands that it's sitting on. And it's entirely possible that I might be off a little bit. So what we want to do is make sure that the steps are parallel to each other, because that's what you're going to be paying attention to when you come down the stairs. That's what will feel weird if they're not parallel to each other. So we're going to double check this by measuring. This height here puts the top of that at 10 inches. This height over here, this height here puts it at a little low. So it's hanging a little low. So we got to raise that up. Now the beauty is we should be able to bring this up a little bit. If this is screwed in properly, then this should come up. And then this should be, are we there yet? Looks like we're close enough, right? I can't see. I think that does it. That looks like it's lined. We've got it at the exact same height going all the way across. They're parallel to each other. I've got the holes drilled on the side for the mounting blocks, and everything's marked. I think we're good to go for the next step. Now the box itself, well, it's got to be finished so that it can take paint. One of the disadvantages of Coosa Board, in my mind, insofar as making furniture and things that really have to have a nice finish afterwards, is that the surface is slightly porous. It's a little bit rough. It doesn't absorb paint per se, but there are a lot of crevices and nooks and crannies. And it can be difficult to get a really fine, fair surface that will take paint and look really good in a final application. This is one of the reasons that I like to use PVC foam board to construct furniture items and cabinets and things like that. It just has a superior surface. It takes paint really well. For this cubby hole bulkhead that I'm building for the forward cabin steps, I'm using Coosa Board because I want the strength of the material. I really feel like the forward steps, well, they're going to be someplace that receive, a lot of constant usage, and there's a lot of force applied to those steps going in and out of the forward cabin. I want to show you the surface so you can get an idea of what the Coosa Board kind of looks like up close. This is a piece of Coosa Board. It's 1/2 inch thick. It's blue water, 26 is what they call it. You can see that it has kind of a rough, almost sandpaper finish to it. You can see the individual roving pieces of fiberglass mixed into the polyurethane foam. It's quite dense, but it does have a little bit of texture, and it is a little bit dusty as you're handling it. This is why I always wear a respirator and have gloves and junky clothes, because this fine dust just gets everywhere, and it's really kind of caustic. What I've done is I've applied some epoxy to the surface of the box that I created for the step. You can see now that kind of the surface is sealed. It's no longer dusty, but it is quite rough, and it's not really a smooth surface. If I put the two side by side, you can definitely see the difference. Now, why do I do this? Coosa Board does not need fiberglass on it in order to be waterproof. It's already waterproof, rot resistant, bug resistant. It's great by itself. You could build a boat out of bare Coosa Board by itself. It would only need some sort of UV protection. If you apply enough primer and fairing and then paint, well, you've got a perfectly finished surface. And in fact, that's what I used when I built the pilot house for the Compact 16 pocket sailboat. The pilot house looks like it was finished just like fiberglass with gel coat, but in reality, it's just paint. And you won't notice that until you get within about 12 inches of the surface. Now, it does take a little bit of work because there's always imperfections in the Coosa Board surface. It does have to be kind of faired with a little bit of fairing compound to kind of make it look really nice. But sometimes for things that are structural, like in the case of the hardtop, or in some of the other bulkheads and stuff, well, I wanted there to be a layer of epoxy or fiberglass kind of sealing in the surface. And then I would build up the fairing and the sanding, paint, and primer from that point forward. Any epoxy or fiberglass you put on the surface of the Coosa Board is just going to make it that much more durable and structural long term. Now, what I found at this point is it can be really difficult to tell, well, what's going on with the surface, and you won't really start to notice the imperfections until you do a little bit to kind of bring out the texture a little bit more. So I often like to do a very light primer coat just so I can see what's going on the surface and how much more work it's going to take to make it look good. A little bit of primer or paint really brings out the imperfections in the surface. You can now see everything. And then I like to use a little bit of West Systems epoxy mixed with low density fairing compound, and I can put that on and sand it down, get a really nice smooth surface. So now it's ready for paint. Once the form is all painted and everything's ready to go, it's time to mount the step blocks. And I through bolt those onto the piece. Coosa Board doesn't really do well when you're using screws unless you have some sort of fiberglass cloth or a very thick layer of epoxy on the surface. The teeth of the screws have to have something to kind of dig into. So through bolting is always a good idea for high stress areas.
In addition to installing the steps in the forward cabin of the Albin 27, I also decided to create some storage in the galley cabinet, basically taking the old icebox and turning it into a little storage area by installing a hatch. But this proved to be a little bit more difficult than you would initially think.
It's on! We're chopping! We got the new chopper. This thing is amazing, way more convenient. And we're gonna cut a hole here in the galley cabinet here part.
We got a new titanium blade. I ordered these from Amazon, and we'll see if they're the real deal. This is a 2-inch plunge cut. That should be able to get us inside there and cut through the ice box.
You can see I got a line marked out on here. This is for a hatch, and we'll be able to gain access to what was formerly the ice box. Well, now it can be part of storage. So, we're going to get to work here, see what we can do. Initially, it was difficult to cut through the cabinet
But once I got the right blade, it went through it like a hot knife through butter. Just goes to show you, if you have the right tool, it makes the job easy. You can see the rough edges where I cut out the hatch opening. The cabinet is made up of multiple layers of plywood and foam and a variety of things. So we want to make this all kind of sealed up, and we'll do that by taking a piece of lightweight fiberglass cloth. We'll laminate that across the edge there, kind of close everything up, and then trim it off and paint it later on. It'll look all sealed up. The cubbyhole bulkhead is permanently attached in place using a series of cheater blocks. Cheater blocks are little pieces of Coosa board that are epoxied to the bulkhead, and it gives you something to screw into, so there's a mechanical attachment. Epoxy is also put inside the joints, and now everything is permanently attached to the head bulkhead. After this, it's just a matter of some fairing and a little bit more paint. This is the faux bulkhead that's going to go right behind where the forward cabin steps are, and it's actually the location where the main battery switch is for the boat. And it comes through the bulkhead. That's why there's a hole right here. And the battery switch is actually mounted right over the top of this. This is a piece of 1/2-inch Celtech. And of course, we'll paint it so it matches the rest of the hull and it's ready to go. Today is a great day. One of the things that I try to do on my YouTube channel is to show projects all the way to a moment of completion. You know, a moment when pretty much the project is done. Maybe it needs some final finishing or it'll get touched up later on, but you can actually see what I've been working on. And today is one of those days. I've reached a point where I'm going to be putting the steps in for the forward cabin. I may ultimately take them out so I don't tear them up over time as I'm moving about, but you can see what they finally look like, and it's just a great feeling to actually get something accomplished. So, I mean, I don't know what to make of this. I'll tell you what, man. It's crushing. So I put the steps back together, and I'm kind of dry fitting everything. I've dry fitted it 100 times before. When I was building the Coosa Board bulkhead and everything, I measured stuff, I marked stuff, and now that it's permanently installed, there's like, something's not right. I don't know. All right, take a look here. So what we have is, so that's how this goes, right? Okay, the top one's okay, but the bottom one is obviously not. First of all, there's two problems here. First of all, this height here is 1 inch shorter than it is over here. I don't even know how that happened. Secondly, this is not in the right place. I put this, why did I put it like that? That means this needs to be here. And I think what's happened is, this needs to be flipped like that. The holes are in the same place, but this should be out here. And I put it together backwards. And the problem is, now it's permanently installed, and with bolts and nuts. So now I gotta get inside there. How am I gonna unscrew this? Luckily there's a hatch there, but I gotta reach in there, somehow grab these nut heads, and unscrew them. But even if I do that, that would lead me to believe that the holes are in the wrong place because this thing's not at the proper height. I measured that early on. I don't understand. Why does this keep happening? So aggravating. I'm so angry right now. I just... All right, let's fix this thing. I'm gonna have to. This is just so much work now. I've got to get in there and fix that piece and turn it around and drop it down 1 inch. It probably rests on the floor. Why did I mark it higher? How did that happen? So the issue is that there is a bevel. See here? There's a bevel on this side. See how it's rounded over? And I mistakenly thought, oh, well, it gets finished like that when it goes against the bulkhead. But it actually doesn't. The bevel goes on this side because this sticks out. It goes like that. See? And that's what gets the step, the proper distance from the first step out this way. So now I got to figure out how to put this back in there. But more importantly, I wrote all over the back side of this thing, which means I'll have to sand this down and then revarnish it. It's just exhausting. I mean, who would have guessed that the bevel would be on that side? I don't remember. That was 8 years ago when I took it apart. I'm back in the shop today. I thought I was going to have a successful moment of completion last week when I got ready to finally put the steps back in the forward cabin of my pocket trawler. But as things worked out, I didn't quite design it properly, and some of the components were in the wrong place. I had to start over again. Luckily, with a little bit of paint and some wood finish, some new holes drilled, I think I'm ready to try and put this thing back together. If we're lucky, today we'll get a moment of completion and the forward steps of the Albin 27 will be done, and I can move on to another project. Man, after all that work, I think this has come out pretty good. I finally have steps in the forward cabin of my Albin 27. And I've got some storage in the old ice box. They really came out good. I'm very pleased. I think after all that, it's time to head to the pub. Please leave your comments below. I really appreciate it. It lets me know how I'm doing on the YouTube channel. If you have a question for me, you can find my email on the homepage for the YouTube channel or on my website. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll see you next time. Stay motivated.
If you like these videos, please hit the subscribe button. These videos would not be possible without your support.